Good morning. We are back with another session of our basic Learning Fusion 360 for Woodworkers live stream classes. And there is a little difference this morning because while we are recording live, we're not streaming to YouTube because for the last several days, internet connectivity has been rather sketchy and it can't seem to maintain a stream. So instead of waiting for the internet to come back and be its usual self, I'm just going to record this, and if it takes a whole day for it to upload to YouTube, well, so be it. At least you will have another class to watch. I have a few questions from some viewers to answer during the session. I'm going to hopefully walk through each of those with you, so you'll have answers. Unfortunately, I won't be able to see any questions in the chat because there is no chat, but I will be back on the internet when the internet is back on with me. So, without any more delays, what are we going to do this morning? We're going to, as you can see up here at the top, model a Timberframe bench. Now, I know what people are thinking. That is going to be so much more complicated than any of the things that we've done so far, but it really will not be. I'm going to be modeling this today in inches for our American friends. If you want to see a metric version of this, please let me know, because I am always happy to be told that my metric native language is what people are looking for. But with about 90% of our viewers in America, I have promised to do the majority of these in inches, which means I sit here with a millimeter to inch chart in front of me and hope for the best. So we're going to get started the same way we always do, by creating a new sketch. Now, when you're looking to create a new sketch, you want to do this on the plane that gives us the best perspective on where the ends of things are. So if you were going to look at a bench, there are really three ways to look at it. You can look at it on the front, which would be this face. You can look at it from the side, which would be this face. Or you can look at it from the top. And depending on what you want to do, it could work to model it from either the side or the top, but I'm going to model it from the top because I think we will get more information that way. When you're modeling these things, you can think of it almost like a cross-section drawing, but it's not really a cross-section, it's all the cross-sections at once. So you'll see in a second what that means. Now this little circle down here, this is the center of our drawing. It's the center of our screen. Some people like to model with that in the middle. Some people like to model it down at the left edge or the right edge. Today we're going to model with it at the in the middle. If I'm modeling on the side of a piece, I usually have it in the middle at the bottom. And if we're modeling on the top of a piece, I usually have it actually in the middle. So we'll take a center point rectangle and we'll click and make a box. Now, it doesn't have to be the size of the box that we want. We're definitely not going to make a bench that is 3 inches by 1.25 inches. So why am I drawing it that size? It's because that's the size of the screen, and I don't know how big the screen is. We'll find out in a second, because if I go up here and I click on this dimension tool, and click on this long edge of our bench, and click on the background, I don't want it to be 5.8 inches. I want this thing to be 6 feet. Now, 6 feet is going to be 72 inches, and I just hit enter. Now, it's obviously made it way bigger. So I will scroll out with the middle mouse wheel and drag it over, click the dimension tool on the side, and we're going to make this 22 inches wide. And that will give us a 6 foot by almost 2 foot bench. And I think this is about the perfect size. Now before we go on, what I was just doing was scrolling in and out, scroll in, scroll out on the mouse. Let's talk for a second about the mouse commands. We can move our mouse around like you would in any other piece of software. On my Mac, my mouse is this little external $10 Bluetooth mouse that I picked up on Amazon a few years ago. It works perfectly well. You don't have to go out and buy a $100 mouse to use Fusion 360, but don't try to use it with your trackpad. It just won't work. You will just get distracted and annoyed, and for $10, don't bother. So if I click with the middle mouse button, you can see it changes to this movement tool, which allows me to move it around the screen. I can move it anywhere I want so that I can see other parts of the diagram. If I hold down the Shift key and do the same thing, it rotates it in 3 dimensions. Now, this is only a 2-dimensional sketch, so that could get very confusing. So let's go over here to this little icon over here, and I'm going to click on the top, and it will bring us back into exactly that top plane, and I will scroll back in. All right, now let's continue with our modeling. This is going to be a laminated top bench, but I'm not going to model the laminations. Now, a lot of people really get a bit confused by how I do this, because they say, oh, you want it to look realistic. It's like, yes, I do. But is it going to help me to do any of the construction or joinery if I model this and actually draw in all the individual laminations, or is it just going to make it more complex to model? And the answer is, it's just going to make it really complex to model. So why would I bother to do all that work to model something where I know that a bunch of boards are going to be glued together? So I model things at a specific level of complexity. I want to model the shape, I want to model the joinery, and I want to model as much as possible the look and feel without having to take too much time to do it. What I don't generally model is glue-ups to make panels and boards, and I only model, unless absolutely necessary to show something off, the wooden components of a piece of wooden furniture. So I don't model the screws, I don't model rope handles and things like that, because it is just so much extra work. But I will model all the joinery. So if I'm going to put in a screw, I'm just going to put in a little circle for where the hole is going to be if the pattern is important. So the upside to that is, when you're modeling, it's a very, very good idea to model the things that you need in as much detail as it will take you to make it, or as much detail as you think is necessary to show somebody else to communicate your project so that they can, approve it, pay for it, whatever. So it's very important to get things like the wood in the right color combinations. But it's not very important to get things like, this board is going to be glued up from 2 pieces that are 6 inches wide, so I need to know where that glue line is going to be. Well, you probably don't need to know where that glue line is going to be, and if it is, it's an unusual situation, so you don't need to worry about it. Anyway, let's get back to modeling our bench. Now we're going to have this big slab top glued up. A lot of people will call that a modernized Roubo style, which is a great way to think about it. This bench is also going to have 4 legs, 4 big square legs that are connected to the top using mortise and tenon, and it's going to have 4 interlocking stretchers down close to the bottom, but it will not have an apron. I'm going to talk about some of those things, but we'll start with why not an apron. If you wanted to have a bench with an apron, the apron would normally be there to provide rigidity to the top and to the bench to stop it from potentially racking, and it would be to hold pieces on the top of the bench that are too long to be held on the top, sort of that go beyond the side of the bench. To do that, you would have to have the legs flush with the outside and have a big apron system out there to model the whole thing. It is very much a question of personal choice, but I've always found that aprons get in the way of clamping things to the bench top. And I think that's a very, very useful thing to be able to do. I am much more likely to need to clamp a board down than I am to work with a board that is so long and unwieldy that it's sitting up on top of the bench clamped down is going to be a problem. Working on a piece that is, say, a foot wide, standing vertically up on top of the bench, is not a problem at all for me. And to work on the side of a piece that is significantly longer than that is just so rare. Now, if you make a lot of full-size doors, maybe you need a way to mount it to the side of the bench. If you work with incredibly long pieces that are very, very, very thick, that might be your reason to have a side mounting system. But for the most part, I work with furniture, and I think most of the viewers that are looking are going to be working with furniture scale projects. So the biggest thing you're probably going to ever have to deal with is a cabinet door. And I would work a cabinet door sitting up on top of the bench. Not to mention, the vast majority of the work that I'm doing on the sides of that cabinet are going to be done with the piece flat against the bench, because I work in the Japanese style. So cutting mortises, cutting tenons, cutting dovetails, it's all done with the piece flat on the bench. So I don't need it mounted any other way. Anyway, that's why no upper rails. Let's begin with a leg. We're only going to model one leg and half of each stretcher on one side. So let's start up here. I'm just going to draw a leg in profile. Now, this leg is going to be square. So that means that this side is going to be equal to this side. So let me click the equals button up here, and I click on one side and the other. And now those sides are equal. And I can hit escape to get out of that tool. Now, I'm going to have one of these on each corner, but I'm only going to draw one. Now, if I click this dimension tool, it doesn't just let me tell you how big something is, it tells you how far something is from an edge. So to give us some space for vices, we are going to move this in. We are going to move it in exactly 14 inches. Now, if you're using vice hardware that requires more than 14 inches or less than 14 inches, then you probably want to model this with a different spacing. Say, for example, my vice hardware that I usually use with these only requires a 10-inch clearance. So I'm going to model this with a 10-inch clearance. So I double-click, I type 10 and hit enter, and it moves my leg back out so that it's 10 inches away from the end. I'm going to do the same thing by clicking on these two lines, and I will click over here, and I will say that it is going to be 3 inches in from the side. 3 inches I find is good. It doesn't make the bench tip in any way when the leg is 3 inches in, but it gives me 3 inches to clamp something to the outside edge of this bench. And now the only dimension that I need is to be able to tell us how big this leg is, and it is going to be 3.5 inches square. And I think that's a pretty good size for that to be. 3.5 inches will give us relatively good stability. You could make this 4 or even 4.5, maybe 5 inches. I've seen 5-inch legs on big Timberframe benches, but 3.5 will be plenty for a 6-foot bench. If this was a 12-foot bench, maybe instead of having legs in the middle, you'd move them considerably further in, and you could make them 4.5, 5 inches. But if I was going to have a 12-foot bench, I'd just have 2 6-foot benches, because moving a 12-foot bench is not going to be pleasant. All right, so the next thing that I want to do is I want to have some stretchers. So I will click on this rectangle tool, and we are going to have stretchers that are exactly the same size as our legs. So I'm going to go out here to the middle, and I'm going to do the same thing. Go out here as far as the middle. Now, I need to tell this exactly where these points are. I don't have to give it any measurements. The fewer measurements you want it to have, the better, because that way if you need to change anything, you don't have to worry about how to change it later. So what I'll do is I will say up here in our constraints that the line here is coincident with, in the same direction as, the center point. And I'm going to say that this line here is also coincident with the center point. I'm going to click on this collinear constraint. You can always click on constraints and see what they are, but if we say collinear, in the same line as, not just in the same plane, but in the same line, the inside face of our stretcher is in the same plane as the inside of our leg, and the same goes for the inside leg of the shorter stretcher. And now they are all turned black. Blue means it is missing a dimension, and black means that it has been fully constrained. In other words, it knows exactly where it is in 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional space, depending on what modeling you're trying to do. I always model in 2-dimensional space unless I can't avoid it. So we are done here with all the pieces that we need to put in. And if I say Finish Sketch and zoom out, I could see that we have this bench top and our leg structure. So if we look at it from the side, hold down Shift and drag up, you can see we're modeling on this plane. If you look at this cube, you can see we are on the front. We're looking at it almost exactly from the front and sort of a little bit of the top, and that is what we're looking down at. So I'm going to tell it to model the bench top up and the legs down from the center. So I will click on this extrude tool here, and then I will pick the shapes that I want to be part of the bench top. So I click this, but it's missing these other 3 holes. So I'll just fill them in. They won't show as holes, they're just going to show as exactly what they are. And we're going to make it 3.5 inches thick by typing in 3.5, and we will make it a new component. And we will hit OK. Now, a component is really just a collection of bodies. We now have one body in this component. If I double click on it and rename it, just type bench top and hit enter, we can see that we have this component. And a component is a collection of bodies, but it can have one or any number of bodies in it. You can make it without a body at all. So you can think of it as a file folder with sheets of paper. It can contain other components, so you can have it as a file folder with other file folders in it. But either way works. Now, we need to model our legs. The sketch has gone away, so I will open up the Sketches folder and turn back on our sketches. I will turn off this component. I'll just turn the whole component off. And I'm going to scroll down to the bottom. You can see up here in the cube, we're on the bottom. And I'm going to model a leg by clicking Extrude the leg. And I will drag down in the direction I want it to be. Now, our bench top is 13.5 inches thick, and I personally like a 39-inch bench top when I am working. So we are going to make this 35.5 inches, and it is minus. You can see that we are going down, so 35.5 inches. If you ever get things in the wrong direction, you can change the minus sign to no minus sign, and you can see it now goes in the upper direction, or add a minus sign, it goes down. It really is that simple. We will say New Component and hit OK. We will call this our legs. We'll put all the legs in one component. Now, the next piece that I want is I want to model the short stretchers. Click on the short stretcher, say New Component, and we will say, instead of distance, to object, and it will go, no, right, we haven't given it any dimensions yet. It is going to be, how long is it going to be? We actually do have to give it a distance. We are going to make these 6.5 inches. But it is going, no, what am I talking about? Not 6.5 inches. We're going to make it 3.5 inches, just like where it is in the other dimensions. So it is going to be square, a 3.5 inch square, which is about what you can get from a 4x4, which will be very convenient to just use dimensional lumber for this. They have 4x4s in all kinds of different things. But instead of it being 3.5, we need it to be from somewhere else. So we will go up here to Profile Pane and hit Object. So instead of modeling from the top of the bench top, we want to model from the bottom of the leg. How far up from the bottom of the leg is this offset? We are going to make it 11 inches from the bottom. It's gone in the wrong direction, so we will say minus 11 inches. And we are going to make it 3.5 inches thick. So I can change that to minus, and it will go 3.5 inches down, but that's not what we want. We want the bottom of the stretcher to be 11 inches off the floor. So we have that in the right place already. We can do that again for the second one, but we're not going to. You'll see in a second. So I have this component, and I'm going to call that short stretchers. I will go over here and click Extrude again, pick the long one, but instead of measuring up from the bottom and all that and telling it how thick it is, I'm just going to say from the bottom of the short stretcher to the top of the short stretcher, and again, a new component. And I'm going to hit OK. Now we're finished with our sketch. That's all we need from that one. And I will rename this long stretchers. It's very cold here this morning. My fingers are almost totally numb, but we will get through the rest of our build. Now, there are several things that I want to do with this before we finish with our bench. I don't want to model all of our other components yet because first we'd like to do some joinery. To do the joinery, I'm going to go up here to the top of our bench. I'm looking down at it with the top actually off, and I'm going to construct some mortise and tenon joinery. I'm going to click on this new sketch, and I'm going to draw a new sketch on the top of our leg. You can see the top of the leg here. I can turn off the short and long stretchers. I always think it's a good idea to only model with the things visible that you need to have visible. I'm going to draw a line from one corner to the other. So that gives us a directional line, and I will hit escape. If I click on that, I'm going to turn it into a guideline by hitting X. See, it changes this little icon over here. And when it becomes a dotted guideline, that means it doesn't get used for the actual cutting up and modeling of things. It just gives us something to reference. Now, if I hit center point rectangle, I can go in here and find the middle of our diagonal line, which means it's the center of our block, and I'm going to draw a square. If I go up here to the equals sign, and I click on each of these in turn, I now have a square, and you can see it is centered on the top of my leg. And the question is, how big do I want it to be? I will click on this dimension tool. I will click on one end, and I'm going to make it a 2-inch by 2-inch tenon. That's the only thing I need in this sketch. I will say Finish Sketch, and I will now come up here and take a look at the top of our tenon. Now I want that tenon to go into the bench, so I will click on the Extrude tool. I will click on the drawing of our tenon. And how far up are we going to be? It is going to be a blind mortise and tenon, so I'm going to make this 2.5 inches long, and we will join it to the rest of our leg. You could model it separately and join it later. Sometimes I do that, but for now we will just join it to the rest of our leg, and you can see we have this beautiful thing into the bench top itself. Now I could cut a hole for that in the bench top, but we actually need to put 4 holes, so I'm just going to wait till we have 4 legs. We're going to cut the rest of the joinery though before we duplicate our parts. Now we have our legs, we also have our stretchers. Now if I look over here, I can see I need a mortise and tenon joint on each of these, but they are going to intersect with each other unless I am very careful about it. So our leg is going to be 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches, and I'm going to come down here and I am going to make those tenons so that they do not cause a problem with each other. So what I'll do is, looking at this from the top, is we are going to make full height tenons that do not go all the way through the leg. So I'm going to model on the top of one of these pieces, and I am going to draw a tenon which is going from one side of this piece almost to the other. And I'm going to draw another one that goes from that outside edge to this line. Now if I hit P for project, I will project the dimensions of this other stretcher onto our drawing. That is all project does. People talk about it and they say it is very, very complicated, but it is not. It just takes the measurements from one piece and allows you to share them with another piece. So I'm going to make that collinear with the end of this board, and that's really all I need to worry about doing. So we have these 2 tenons. Now if I move this tenon up so that it is closer to the outside of this board, which is exactly what I'm going to do, I will click on the dimension tool and I will make this exactly 1/2 inch in from the side. I'm going to do the same thing with this other one, make it 1/2 inch from the side. And I'm going to make these tenons so that the upper one on the long stretcher is 1.5 inches wide. And I'm going to make the bottom one so it is 2 inches wide. So we will have one longer tenon and one shorter tenon. Some people are going to say that 1/2 inch is not enough of a shoulder, and they might be right depending on the wood. I tend to build from maple, and maple is an extremely strong wood. That's why the 3.5 inch legs and the bench top the way it is, I think that's plenty. If you were going to build this from a much weaker wood, say pine or fir, you might want to have slightly bulkier legs and larger shoulders on your tenons. Okay, so we will say finish sketch. And we're going to go down here, and we will model one tenon. Scroll down, and we are going to make this offset 1/2 inch from the top, so minus, and we are going to make it to the bottom minus 1/2 inch, and we are going to say new body because we want it to join, but we only want it to join to one side. If I hit OK, we'll turn our sketch back on and do exactly the same thing. Extrude from here, from the top of that other tenon to the bottom. If you can reference off something you've already made, that is absolutely the best way to do it, because now I could make changes to, say, the thickness or anything else, and it would already be there. Now, with all the pressure that we're putting on this, these will be nice, strong tenons. Now, you could make these to be different, and I'm going to do this so that you understand how to change things on the fly. We'll turn off the vision of that sketch and just take a look at what that looks like. I'll move it so that you can see the top. I'm going to go in here and edit the sketch, and I'm going to change this so these are 1 inch from the side instead of 1/2 inch from the side. And I'm going to change this dimension so that it is, instead of 2 inches, we're going to make these so that they are not defined based on their width, but their distance from the side. So I will open up the dimension tool, and I will say that from the inside to the outside of our leg is going to be 1 inch. And from the inside here, it is also going to be 1 inch. So we now have tenons that are centered, and I will hit finish. And if you look, it has now changed the 3-dimensional model based on our 2-dimensional sketch. So if you've done it correctly, you will never have to worry about remodeling things, even when you come back and decide to make a change. If we look at it from the side, we now have tenons. I'm not making this correction because there was anything wrong with what we were doing already. I'm making this correction because I have made a change, and I want to show you how easy it is to make that change. Now, we actually need to cut these holes in for the tenons themselves. So I'm going to open up, I'm going to turn back on the leg. We have this leg here, which is great. And I want to combine these to cut out that hole. So I will click on this Modify Combine tool. I will say I want to keep the tools. I am going to cut. And as the target, the thing that is going to be cut, I will pick the leg. As the tool, the thing doing the cutting, I will pick the short stretcher and hit OK. I will right-click on the back and hit Repeat to repeat the thing we just did, and I will cut the leg with the long stretcher. Oh, wait a second, I didn't actually join them together. Turn off our leg. Wait a second, I haven't added these pieces to the short and long stretchers. So I will click Combine, and instead of cutting, I will say Join, and I will join the short stretcher to its tenon and hit OK. I will right-click on the background and hit Repeat and connect the long stretcher to its tenon. Now we will go back, my mistake, I got a little ahead of myself, and I will say that I want to combine and cut. The combined tool is probably the most useful tool in the whole thing. We will turn on our leg and cut our leg with our short stretcher. That looks better. And we will repeat and cut our leg with our long stretcher and hit OK. Now if I turn off the leg, you can see that the two stretchers are there. And if I turn off the two stretchers, you can see that we now have two interlinked mortises. They intersect, and you can see right through the middle, but they do not interfere with each other. Now when you actually do this, you'll want to take a few shavings off the end of each, just to make sure they don't bottom out in our mortises, so that when you put glue on, it is not a problem. But we now have short stretchers, long stretchers, and legs all there together. Now, I want to cut this into the bench top, but before we do that, we want to make the rest of our pieces. So if I go up here to Mirror, I can click on Type, change to Bodies, and I can mirror our short stretcher across the center. And I will say Join. And now I have the short stretcher complete. We will do the same thing and model our long stretcher across the middle. We're going to repeat that and model our long stretcher across this other middle, so we now have two. We're going to repeat again and model our short stretcher across the middle. Now we did this way so that we could cut the joinery on one corner and just duplicate the joinery all the way around. And now I want to do the same thing, model our leg across the middle. And the other thing you can do with this mirror is not just model one body, but model two bodies across the middle. And say OK. So now we have our whole assembly here. Before we do anything else, I would like to model a little shelf that is going to go and sit in the bottom. So I'm going to click on New Sketch, and we're going to model it on top of one of these stretchers. This is going to be a nice basic plywood shelf that is going to sit in a rabbet cut in here. So I need the pieces. I will project, hit P, and I'm going to say I need the placement, the dimensions of this inside line, and this inside line, because I need to know where they are. And I will hit OK. We are going to make a center point rectangle that is going to sit on here, and it is going to go up into the sides, but it is not going to overlap with the short stretchers. So we're going to draw it so that it comes out here. I will say collinear, so this line is in the same place as this line we just had. And if we look, because it's a center point rectangle, it has actually gone out to the other side as well. I didn't have to project those, but I tend to project everything I think I might need, rather than just the few things that I do. It can slow the computer down a little, but we're only talking a few percent. So I'm now going to make a dimensional definition, and I'm going to say that this is going to be inset exactly 1 inch. That's a huge rabbet, but I think it will give us the support to be able to put nice heavy things on our shelf without having to make this shelf go onto the side pieces. Those side stretchers are going to be holding something else on my actual bench. I'm not going to worry about that at the moment, but this is going to go between those pieces. Now, if you were going to do it so that it went with those other sections, let's show you how to do that. The first thing we need is we're going to model on one side. So I'm going to draw a center line that goes up here, and I'm going to click on it and hit X to turn that into a guide, because we're only going to use that as a guide. We will now, we've rotated a little, so let's move back so we're flush with the top. We'll now draw a little rectangle here on the side. I think we're drawing in guide mode. I'll turn off that. You see over here this little box. You can draw in the guidelines or not the guidelines. We don't want to be drawing guidelines now. We want to be drawing the actual thing. I'll draw a rectangle. And again, I will say that this is going to be coincident with this bottom piece of this line. I'm going to give this a dimension, and I will say that this rabbet is also going to be 1 inch. But instead of typing an inch, we're just going to click on the 1 inch there, so we already have it, and hit enter. So now it says fx, function. So if I change this 1 inch, we'll change it temporarily to 2 inches. Both changes both. We'll change it back to 1 inch because a 2-inch rabbet is a little unwieldy. We don't, oh, whoops, I clicked the wrong one. We will change the first one to 1 inch, and it will change both back. So I have that, and we now want to mirror, just like we did with a 3-dimensional object. We can model by double-clicking, so we get the whole thing instead of just one line, and we model it mirrored across to the other side. So now it is right there. And I'm going to click on the inside, the inside one. No, there is no inside one. Perfect. So we will hit Finish Sketch. We will extrude. We will extrude all 5 pieces of this. When I actually make mine, I won't put the rabbet in the sides, but you might want to. It will support things quite well. We are going to say it is a new component, and it is going to be exactly 3/4 of an inch thick. Whoops, not 1/4, 3/4 of an inch thick. It's going in the wrong direction, so we will say -3/4. We will hit OK. And it is now there, but you can see it is overlapping, and if we turn it off, those other pieces have not been cut for it. Let's give it a name so we don't get confused. Shelf. And we are going to go in here and say combine. A long stretcher cut with the shelf. We'll repeat that and cut the other long stretcher with our shelf. Do it 2 more times, once for the other short stretcher and once for the end short stretcher. Now if I turn off the shelf, you can see that we have a nice 1-inch rabbet that is 3/4 of an inch deep, so our shelf will run exactly flat with our stretchers. Okay, we have our shelf, we have our legs, we have our stretchers. Let's put the top on. Let's turn on our bench top. And of course, if we turn off the legs, we can see we don't have any holes for those blind tenons to go into. We need some blind mortises. So if I say combine, and again, you know the drill, pick the 4 legs, hit OK. We turn the legs off, and we now have 4 exactly perfect mortises for our tenons. We now have a bench. Now the other thing that I want to do is I want to shore up some of this joinery. And we could have done this when we only had 1, but I'm going to show you how to do it when we have 4 that we want to deal with. And we're going to shore this up by making them pinned. So I am going to turn off the legs, turn off the shelf, and I will go in and I will say I want to pin these to the tenons right through the mortise. So let us sketch right on the side of our tenon. We are going to draw a nice line down here. I like to put my pins right in the center, but in this case it is not going to work. And I will draw that and show you why there is a problem with that. If I put the pin right in the center, it is going to intersect with the other tenon. So we have to move this a little in. So I'll get rid of my line, and I will draw a different guideline over here that will not intersect. And we're going to make that exactly 1/2 inch from the board. If I hit front, we will show where it is, and I'm going to turn that into a guideline. Now some people like to make round pegs, other people like to make square pegs. I like square pegs. So I'm going to draw a square peg. I'm going to draw a second square peg. You could, actually no, we'll mirror it in a second by drawing a center line. So we have a center line and another center line. So we know where that is. We are going to double click on our rectangle, and we will say mirror. So all the changes we make to one will be made to the other. So we have a square and another square peg. We will hit dimension, Click on one side, and we are going to make this exactly a 1/2 inch square. I will click the equals and make this a square. And we now have a square 1/2 inch peg, which is a little big. So let's use 3/8 inch pegs, and we will drag it up and down until we get it visually into be at the right place. What I will do is, instead of saying how far in from the side, I'm going to hit dimension, and I'm going to give it the dimension of from one side to the other, from one inside face to the other inside face. And I will say that this is going to be 1 inch between. And that will give us quite a large spacing, but it should be quite stable. That looks pretty good. Now, if I hit Finish Sketch, we now have 2 pins that we can use. I will say Extrude, and I will make those 2 pins. We are going to say New Component, and they are going to go from the outside of our stretcher. Can flip over, see the inside. The whole model's upside down, doesn't matter. To the inside, scroll back, and you can see it's going from one to the other. Now, doesn't seem to want to. There's another way to do it. We will do it from in both directions. You get some errors sometimes to do this. So we are going to go from the profile plane, from where it is, to the back. We'll also go all the way to the front. This is a known glitch, by the way. This happens quite a lot. It'll say cannot complete extrusion if you're doing something in both directions, so sometimes you have to manually do it in both directions. So we'll do a new component. And you can see we now have those pins that are going all the way through. Are they going all the way through? They're not going all the way through. Oh, yes, they are. Yes, they are. They're just going through to the wrong place. So let's select the inside face, not of the rabbit, but of the actual thing. Now that's probably not going to work because our pins are going to go all the way through and intersect. No, that's fine. We have lots of space for another pin to go in there. We'll do 1 pin on the short stretchers and 2 pins on the long ones. That's not a problem. Looking good. Now we're going to go around and we're going to create a nice little model on the side of this other stretcher. We are going to model a pin that is right in the center. So we'll draw a center line, click on it and hit X. And we will model that same 3/8 inch by 3/8 inch equals one side and the other. Dimension, just like on the one we just had, 3/8 inch, and hit Enter. And we will hit Finish Sketch. And this one we are going to model out to this face and other side in to the inside face. We will say New Component. And you can see that is going to go through that space, and they are not going to intersect. Okay, so we'll name the first one Long Stretcher Pins. Short Stretcher. Make a spelling mistake, it doesn't matter. These are just for your benefit. And it will go all the way through. Now, we have 1 big pin, 1 pin going this way, 1 pin going the other way, and a pin on the bottom. So I think those will work out quite well. We can see our bench top, we can see we're missing our legs, but for now, what I need to do is make the rest of these pins. Now this is why we did everything at the beginning on only 1 piece. So we'll take a second. So we say mirror these 2 across these 2 across the center. Turn off our bench top so we can see our mirror lines. And we are going to model them across the center. and hit OK. We'll repeat and model all 4 of them. So if I open up this long one, I can select all 4 bodies and mirror them across the middle. Hit OK. If I open up the short stretcher, I can do the same thing. I will say repeat mirror. Copy 1 across the center line, and copy both across the center line. So now I have all the pins I need. Looking good. I don't think I need to keep them in separate objects anymore, so I'm going to just call them pins. I will take all the bodies and move them up into the pins, and I will get rid of the little short stretcher object that we created. Object component calls them different things at different times, but they are interchangeable names. So if I now say I want to cut the short stretcher, I can open up my pins and cut it with all the pins, so it goes all the way through. I will repeat for the other short stretcher, select all the pins, say OK. I will repeat that for the long stretcher, and repeat it for the other long stretcher. Now, if I turn the pins off, whoops, I can see when I zoom in that there are holes in all the tenons. Now what do we need to do? We need to cut the holes in the legs. So we'll turn off the stretchers, turn on the legs, and I will say repeat combine with 1 leg, 2 legs, 3 legs, and 4 legs. You can see this is actually much faster than you think it might be. We could have done this before we mirrored them, and that would have been a good idea. But as you can see, everything is in there, and our hidden joinery is exactly where we expect it to be. Now, the pins are not hidden. The pins are showing up, and you can make them out of the same species, but what I like to do is I'm going to model these with a contrasting color. We have this maple, so I'm going to scroll down here to solid wood. I'm going to say stained. You wouldn't actually use stained pegs, but we're going to make it so that it is obvious. We will click on this 3D maple stained dark and drag it to the pins. That's normally what I do to show that things are end grain. You can change the color by editing it in the appearances, but for now you can see that there is this pin, and they are a slightly different color. If we hit A for appearance again, we can right-click on it and hit Edit, and you can see that we have these 2 colors. If I drag this color down, I can make the end grain a little darker, and I can even make the light grain, darker, lighter, just by dragging it around. You can always customize these, so instead of there just being 1 color of stain, you can make multiple colors and use them in your project. It really gives it a more realistic feel, so you have a better idea of what it's going to look like before you get into the mess of building the project. I call this soft prototyping, mostly because it isn't hard, but also because it's in software. So let's take a look at our benchtop with the thing on it, and we have everything we need. I would put a nice vise on this. When I build mine, I'm going to be using a wagon vise on the end and a bunch of dogs. You could also use a nice cast iron vise up here. You might even want to put 2 cast iron vices on it, and you can pick those up for about 30 or 40 bucks on Amazon. So I usually recommend that anybody who is getting started and doesn't know what kind of vise they want, take a cast iron vise, stick it on the end here, and for 30 bucks you have all the work holding you need if you combine it with dogs. Now, what's a dog? Well, a dog is a round or square thing that you stick in a mating hole. And so you can have a dog that goes into your vise, and you will have dogs that go into holes on your bench. Well, we don't have any holes on our bench. Let's make some dog holes. So I'm going to go up here, and I am going to model on the top of my bench. Click on the top of my bench. I am going to model some holes. Where am I going to model the holes? Well, I could model a whole bunch of them, but I'm actually just going to model one hole that is exactly over here. These are going to be 3-inch holes, so I'll click Dimension, click on it. Remember, I haven't drawn this to size. I've only just drawn where it is, approximately 3/4 inch. You don't have to get it anywhere close to the size you want. I want that to be, from one end, I want it to be 6 inches in. And from this side, I want it to be 3 inches over. So we now have a dog hole. You can see in 3-dimensional space where that's going to be. I will say Finish Sketch, and I will go over and click Extrude. Now I could cut that dog hole in, but that's not what we're going to do. We're going to do this totally differently. I'm going to say that this is going to go all the way through the bench, so right to the bottom. No problem. And we are going to make a new component. It's a temporary component, but we'll make a component. We're even going to go down here, turn off our pins, and change its name to Dog Holes. Now, it doesn't look like a hole at all. It looks like an actual piece. We'll open up our folder and click on Body, and you can see it isn't a hole. It's actually a 3-dimensional body. Well, that seems like we've gone in the wrong direction, but I don't think that's true. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create all the little dogs and use them to cut the holes. So I don't have to select them. I don't have to cut individual holes. We're just going to create the dog hole cutters. So now if I go up here and I pick this Create Pattern, Rectangular Pattern, there's a shortcut to it here too. Make sure that we select bodies and pick that body. If you can't pick it here, you can always just pick it in the tree. We will say direction. We're going to move it left and right. So they are going to go in this direction and this direction. We'll zoom in and take a look at what we're doing here. How far apart do we want them to be in this direction? We want them to be, this is minus, so we're going to make them minus 5 inches apart. How many are we going to have? Oh, that's extent. Spacing, quantity 5 inches apart, minus. We're going to have, if we look at it here, 5 will be too many at that spacing. So I can either change this to, say, 3 inches apart, which I think is a bit close. Oops. Or we can just have 4 of them. And I think that will give us a really nice dog spacing. It gets the final one a little closer in to the center. And you could space these exactly evenly as well. That would be fine. But I think I'm going to have them 5 inches on the center, and that will give me a nice pattern. The other ones, they are not going to be 15 inches apart. They are also going to be 5 inches apart. I like a 5-inch grid. Sometimes I do a 5.5-inch grid. I actually do it in metric, so it doesn't work out to be exactly 5 inches. And we are going to put these most of the length of our bench by having 13 in our rows. And that will bring us up. I'll show you in a second how we find out exactly the distance. But I will say OK, and we now have a whole bunch of these dogs in there. If I turn off the bench top, you can see we have all these nice little holes. All these nice little dog all these nice little dog cutters. Now you'll see that there are some that are actually interfering with the tenons on our legs. There are 2 ways you could deal with this. You can leave this one out and not bother to have it, or you can do what I would do and just say, no, I'm just going to cut that straight down into the leg, and that will be totally fine. It will not weaken that tenon in any significant way. If you don't want to have one there because the tenon is in the way, you can take that one out. You can take out that whole row if you don't want that row to be there. But I personally think that is a good idea to have. You might want to start this row further in. You might just want to not have that hole. You might want to have that hole and not worry at all about it. I'm going to say we're not going to worry about it. So I'll turn back the bench top and say combine. As you could have guessed, we will cut the bench top with, click 1, scroll down, And we will cut it with all 52 of our holes. Hit OK. And now we'll go up here and we will delete by hitting right-click and remove our dog hole cutters. If we look up now, we can see our shelf and our floor right through these lovely dog holes that we have. Not bad, right? So, look at the lighting effect. You can even see that the light coming from above the bench is projecting holes onto our shelf. So that's not bad at all. Not bad, and we have a nice, solid timber frame bench with square pegged construction and a lower shelf. Chris Schwartz would probably be quite proud of us. He would tell us to make it out of yellow pine and build it with thicker legs and a thicker bench top. But for now, we have a almost 2-foot bench, a 6 foot by almost 2-foot bench with holes, with legs, with stretchers, and with a lower shelf. I'm probably going to model a bit of a more involved version of this bench with some actual storage and a little more space in a future video, but that is significantly more advanced, and we're going to do that more as a shaker-style workbench with actual drawers underneath. So that has done it for today, I believe, and we are going to finish up there. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments below or go to our website and send them over for our next video. I think I have answered all the questions from before about how to pick an initial sketch, how to do mortise and tenon joinery on parts without having to make the tenons separate and join them later. I've done both ways in this. We did it on the top of the legs. If we turn off this bench top, these ones were modeled integrally without having to combine them, and the ones here were modeled as separate pieces and joined later, so you now have both methods. And the cutting of the dog holes, how to create many holes without having to select dozens of objects. We did that just that way for you, but that is the way I would have done it anyway because it is so much faster. Okay, so if you have liked what we have done today, please click on the like button. If you haven't, click dislike, but if you don't mind, if you've watched the video this far and you still don't like it, I don't know why you're still here, but if you are, if you click the dislike button, please put in the comments below why you don't like it and what you would like us to change. Let's say that again. What would you like us to change? For the next video, what can we do better to make this more educational for you? This is made for all of our students out there, and we are sharing them so that anybody else can join in. It seemed selfish to make all these videos for our students. We've done that in the past without sharing them, especially in this time of pandemic with everybody sitting at home trying to learn how to do something with their time, and I think this is a wonderful use of time. If you want to see more content, we do a lot of these live streams, so you can hit subscribe and ring the bell so you know when we go live, especially when the internet connection is not being so weird and we can actually stream these live. We do a lot of these in the mornings, especially here, and sometimes we do them in the evenings or in the middle of the day. Sometimes I even come on and do an extra one in the night if I'm awake and I feel that there is something that I haven't covered that day in class. So yeah, feel free to share this with your friends, and we are all finished for today. Have a great day. Have fun modeling and have fun building all the things you model. See you later.